Joining me right now is Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. General, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks very much. Could the U.S. really stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, knowing that the pipeline is going into Germany? I mean, could the U.S. actually do that, what President Biden just said?
Well, we could issue sanctions against Germany, that's for sure. I think he probably has some tacit agreement from the German chancellor to shut it down, even though the German chancellor would not make a point of that and would never even mention the word Nord Stream 2. Listen, I think we put far too much emphasis on this. I don't think Nord Stream 2 is a big deal for Putin in this specific crisis because he's not drawing any revenues from it now. He's drawing revenues from the other pipelines he has, and he's already started to cut back on some of that, particularly what is going into Ukraine. This is about future revenues, and I think when Putin thinks about it, he knows this crisis will pass, and certainly Germany is going to execute Nord Stream Pipeline 2 at some point. So we're making a big deal out of it. I think it has less impact as a deterrence on Putin.
Yeah, I mean, especially since Germany is still reliant on Russia regardless. Where are they getting their gas? Where are they getting their oil? And they still have that tie. And I find it hard to believe that the U.S. is actually going to be able to stop Nord Stream pipeline and get Germany to push back on Russia. I mean, are we really in a united front here?
Oh, no, we're not even close. There's a significant disagreement on what the sanctions going forward would be. The United States is going to have to lead in that if Putin does conduct this invasion. But I do believe that we're in a pretty serious diplomatic phase right now with Macron talking to Putin yesterday. I think what he's getting, they both seem to admit that there's some progress being made. Macron is now talking to Zelensky this week. He's the president of Ukraine. What's happening here is Macron is trying to revise the Minsk II agreement, which was never implemented, and that's largely solving the differences between Russia and Ukraine in eastern Ukraine. And that is what he is trying to reignite here, and hopefully he's able to achieve some success. But it also indicates the differences that exist. Macron is trying to move away from U.S.-led leadership in Europe. He's been at this for a number of years. Russia certainly wants the United States to play a much lesser role in Europe than it's playing right now. So we'll see what comes of this. We'll probably get an answer in about a week or two.
Yeah, I want to ask you about Iran, but let's first finish this conversation with the idea that you don't even think that an outright invasion is going to happen, right? Tell me about that and what kind of concessions Russia would get if, in fact, it does go along with the U.S.'s thinking and not do a full-on invasion into Ukraine. What are your thoughts on how this plays out?
Well, I don't think they would do a full-out invasion, which means change the regime and occupy Ukraine. It doesn't fit Putin's pattern. After all, in 2008, he stopped short of going to the Georgia capital with his troops, pulled them back, and is holding a much smaller piece of territory because he accomplished what he wanted. Georgia did not join NATO. In 2014, when annexed Crimea went into eastern Ukraine, a new government, an anti-Russian government, was installed in Ukraine after the people ran out Russia's stooge Yanukovych, but Russia did not take on all of Ukraine. And the reason I think is pretty obvious. He certainly doesn't want to own it. He wants to influence and have some control of it, but his pattern is he doesn't want ownership and all the accountability and responsibility and problems that goes with something like that. Secondly, and this is key, he has not prepared the Russian population for a full-out invasion that would cause an increase in casualties. There's no preparation for his domestic audience for that, and he would be doing that. I believe he was going to conduct an all-out. It's likely he'll do a limited invasion in eastern Ukraine, certainly, and complement that with a fairly aggressive cyber attack on the electric grid, maybe the financial system itself, maybe obviously shutting off the energy sources to put pressure on that population and attempt to get some significant political concessions from the Ukraine government. I think that is far more likely in terms of what actions he'll take if the diplomacy, and he's not able to get any concessions out of the diplomacy effort.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're taking me back to what Joe Biden said when this all started. Well, it depends on what kind of an incursion he makes. If it's a small incursion, I mean, if what you're talking about plays out, then does the U.S. do anything about it? Because I'm reminded of Biden's comments a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, that'll be a test for the United States and the Europeans. If Putin does a limited incursion, does the United States and the Europeans say, oh, well, he didn't do the full out. That means we're successful and we don't have to do much of anything against him. If that's the case, Putin wins, certainly. And the United States has got to have steadfastness here and leadership.
It does feel like Putin is winning, and also Iran is winning. The U.S. and Iran having these indirect talks on a nuclear deal in Vienna today. U.S. officials say, quote, significant gaps in an agreement still exist. General, where is this going? Why is this administration so bent on getting us back into the nuclear deal? And I find it just stunning that China and Russia are speaking for the United States in this Iranian negotiation.
Well, the Iranians won't do any direct talking with us, so that's why the other participants in the original deal, have voices, and they're carrying a message to the Iranians. This administration has been wedded to that original deal of 2015, which many of us believe is fundamentally flawed. They came in and said to the American people, we're going to make a stronger and longer deal. In other words, they were going to improve it, something that President Trump wanted to do as well. And guess what? There's been no effort to do that. It looks like everything we're hearing coming out of Vienna is that we're going to remove the sanctions, and the Iranians will likely keep most of what they had in the 2015 deal, and maybe even more in terms of highly enriched uranium and centrifuges, because they've increased it close to 60%, and it was below 4% in terms of highly enriched uranium. So I think we're going to actually have, Maria, a worse deal than we had in 2015, and because they're so wedded to having a deal. It's make the deal at all costs. Makes no sense. Arabs are opposed to it. Certainly Israel's opposed to it. And we're just heading right back down a very bad path again, which is going to make things worse in the region.
Why? Why? I mean, they're still chanting death to America. Why? I mean, I know that it's the same foreign policy team that are doing the negotiating for Joe Biden that it was for Barack Obama. Is that why? Why are we so wedded to this deal?
Yeah, it's amazing. We're going to give them a windfall of billions and billions of dollars again. We saw what they did with the money when we gave it to them in 2015. That was the same year they helped to topple the friendly government in Yemen. And now the Houthis are on the rampage and dropping missiles into Saudi Arabia and the UAE on a regular basis. Where does all that money come from, those missiles? It came from that original deal. We're about to give them billions of dollars again. And what will happen? That'll light a match in the Middle East, and their aggressiveness will become more robust in terms of what they're doing. And their missile development program, which is not a part of the deal, will be increased, and they're able to buy conventional weapons all over the world. Their threat to the Middle East stability and security will get worse.